boy left soda on a porch. A chef got revenge with a potato. A radar melted chocolate. These great discoveries were made completely by accident. It started with pain. In the aftermath of the American Civil War, a former Confederate colonel named John Pemberton was trying to treat the lingering agony from a saber wound. He wasn't just a pharmacist, he was his own patient. Searching for relief, he began experimenting with a homemade tonic, mixing fragrant oils, cola nut extract, and an unregulated form of wine. The result was Pemberton's French wine coca, a curious blend meant to soothe the nerves and energize the body. But just as it gained a small local following, a shift in state laws banned alcoholic beverages. Suddenly, the drink had to evolve. So Pemberton went back to the drawing board. He removed the alcohol and reworked the formula, adding citric acid, sugar, and a mysterious flavor syrup. The result was something no one expected. It was sweet, fizzy, and strangely addictive. At first, it was sold in small amounts from soda fountains as a refreshing brain tonic. The name? Coca-Cola. A catchy suggestion from Pemberton's bookkeeper, who thought the two C's would look great in advertising. The drink didn't explode in popularity immediately. In fact, Pemberton died shortly after, never witnessing the empire he accidentally created. His formula passed through several hands until it landed with Asa Candler, a businessman with a talent for marketing. Candler plastered the Coca-Cola logo on clocks, trays, and storefronts. He even handed out free drink coupons, a bold move that turned curiosity into obsession. By the early 20th century, Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink, it was a culture. Sold in every state, recognized by its red script and iconic bottle, it was everywhere. And today, it's one of the most recognizable brands on Earth, sold in over 200 countries. All because one injured soldier was searching for a little relief. In the summer of 1853, a wealthy guest at Moon's Lake House in Saratoga Springs wasn't happy. His fried potatoes were too thick, he said. So he sent them back, not once, but several times. In the kitchen, Chef George Crumb, known for both his culinary skills and sharp attitude, had had enough. Instead of apologizing, he decided to make a point. He sliced the potatoes razor thin, fried them until they were crunchy, and dumped salt over them. He expected the guest to hate them, but the man was delighted. Crumb's sarcastic snack quickly became a hit at the restaurant. People started asking for the Saratoga chips, and word of mouth spread faster than Crumb could fry them. Within a few years, paper bags of potato chips were being sold across the country. What started as kitchen sass turned into one of the world's most popular snacks, consumed by the ton at barbecues, sports games, and movie nights. Today, Americans alone eat more than 1 billion pounds of potato chips each year. All from a culinary accident that happened because a chef decided to strike back with a slice. The next time someone criticizes your cooking, maybe you're just one salty idea away from history. It was a cluttered lab, the kind with forgotten dishes and half-finished experiments. In 1928, Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming went on vacation and left some petri dishes stacked in a corner. When he came back, he noticed something strange. One of the plates growing Staphylococcus bacteria had a patch of mold, Penicillium notatum, and the bacteria around it had vanished. The mold was doing something incredible. It was killing the germs. Fleming didn't throw it away. He studied it, confirmed its power, and tried to extract the active substance. But it wasn't easy. The compound was unstable and hard to produce. For over a decade, progress stalled. Then, during World War II, a team of scientists in Oxford finally found a way to purify and mass-produce it. What followed was nothing short of a medical revolution. Penicillin became the first true antibiotic. Infections that once killed millions, strep throat, pneumonia, infected wounds, suddenly had a cure. Soldiers survived injuries that would have been fatal just years earlier. Hospitals changed, lifespans increased, and it all began with a moldy mistake on a dirty dish. Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen was playing around with a Crookes tube, a glass tube that emits cathode rays, when all of a sudden something unexpected happened. A screen coated with fluorescent material sitting all the way across the room started to glow. Now, nothing was supposed to make that happen. The tube was covered. No visible light was escaping, and yet the screen was lighting up. Röntgen was honestly pretty intrigued. He started experimenting in the dark, placing objects between the tube and the glowing screen. Thick materials like lead blocked the glow. Lighter objects didn't. Then he placed his hand in front of the beam and saw the bones inside. It was, well, kind of eerie. It looked like a ghost of himself, bones and all. That strange invisible ray, which Röntgen just called X for unknown, changed everything. Within months, doctors were using X-rays to locate bullets and broken bones. Suddenly, the inside of the human body was no longer a mystery. No surgery, no guesswork, just a photograph of the skeleton beneath your skin. Today, X-rays are a routine part of medical care, airport security, and even art restoration. And it all started with a scientist, a glowing screen, and a deep curiosity for what lies beyond the visible. Percy Spencer was a self-taught engineer working for Raytheon on radar systems during the 1940s. One day, while testing a magnetron, the device that generates microwaves, he noticed something kind of odd. The chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. It wasn't warm in the room, nothing else had changed. Yet the candy had turned into goo. Spencer was fascinated. He placed popcorn kernels near the device. They popped. He tried an egg. It exploded. What he'd stumbled upon was a new way to heat food using high-frequency radio waves. By bombarding water molecules with energy, the microwaves caused them to vibrate rapidly, generating heat from the inside out. The first microwave ovens were massive, over 5 feet tall and outrageously expensive, but over time they shrank in size and cost. By the 1970s, they were popping up in home kitchens all across the US, changing how people cooked forever. Frozen meals, late-night leftovers, steaming vegetables in under a minute, none of it would exist without that melted chocolate bar. Sometimes the best inventions aren't planned. They just happen when you're standing a little too close to the radar. Wilson Greatbatch was trying to build a simple device that recorded heartbeats. While soldering wires into his prototype in 1956, he accidentally used the wrong resistor. The circuit began pulsing rhythmically, not recording, but pulsing. At first he thought it was a failure, but then he realized this accidental mistake was actually mimicking the human heartbeat. That single error sparked an idea. What if this small battery-powered circuit could be used to control irregular heart rhythms? Greatbatch spent the next years refining his invention, making it small, safe, and stable. In 1960, the first successful human implant of a pacemaker took place, and it worked. What once required an external machine the size of a washing machine could now fit inside a chest. Millions of people who suffer from arrhythmia or slow heartbeats owe their lives to a misplaced resistor and the curiosity to explore what it could do. Not bad for a broken circuit. So, rubber in the early 1800s was honestly more of a problem than a solution. It melted in the summer, cracked in the winter, and, well, it smelled pretty awful. Charles Goodyear, who was honestly obsessed with improving it, kept experimenting relentlessly, even when he was deep in debt. One day, while working with rubber and sulfur, he accidentally dropped the mixture onto a hot stove. What came off the heat wasn't sticky, gooey rubber. It was firm, durable, and kept its shape no matter the weather. Goodyear had no idea what had just happened, but he knew it was something big. He had discovered vulcanization, a chemical process that transforms natural rubber into a flexible, lasting material. The impact was massive. Tires, waterproof shoes, machinery belts, even sports balls, all of those became possible. Without vulcanized rubber, there's no modern transportation, no sneakers, no shock absorbers. Goodyear never got rich from it, but his name still rides on highways across the world. In 1938, a chemist named Roy Plunkett was trying to develop a new kind of refrigerant. He stored a gas called tetrafluoroethylene in a pressurized cylinder overnight. When he opened it the next day, nothing came out. Curious, he cut open the container and found a slippery white powder coating the inside. That powder had some really unusual properties. It was incredibly heat-resistant, chemically stable, and so slick that nothing stuck to it. Plunkett and his team had accidentally created polytetrafluoroethylene, better known today as Teflon. Originally, it was used in military and industrial applications, but it gained fame in the 1960s when it lined non-stick frying pans. NASA later used it in spacecraft because of its heat resistance and reliability. From cooking eggs without oil to keeping rocket parts from overheating, Teflon became the ultimate oops that stuck around. In the 1970s, a chemist at 3M named Spencer Silver was developing adhesives when he stumbled upon a weird one. It stuck to surfaces but peeled off easily without leaving marks. Not strong enough to be useful, it just sat unused for years. Silver promoted it internally, but no one really knew what to do with a glue that didn't actually glue. Then came Art Fry, another 3M employee and choir singer. He needed a bookmark for his hymnal that wouldn't fall out during rehearsals. Remembering Silver's failed glue, he coated some paper with it and stuck it into his book. It held perfectly and peeled off without damage. That was it. What followed was one of the most iconic office tools ever. Sticky notes started covering monitors, desks, and fridge doors all around the world. A failed invention finally found its perfect use when someone just needed to keep their place in a song. In 1903, French scientist Edouard Benedictus accidentally knocked a glass flask off a high shelf. It fell, cracked, but oddly enough, it didn't shatter. Curious, he picked it up and noticed something strange. The inside of the flask was coated with cellulose nitrate, this kind of liquid plastic. The glass had broken, but the coating kept it all together. That moment inspired Benedictus. He realized, hey, if glass could be stopped from flying apart when it breaks, it could actually save lives. So he started experimenting with laminated glass, basically 2 layers of glass with a layer of plastic in between. By 1920, his version of safety glass was being used in car windshields. Later on, it showed up in goggles, skyscraper windows, and all sorts of places. These days, safety glass is everywhere. It doesn't just break, it holds. And it's all thanks to a spilled flask in a chemistry lab and a scientist who wondered why the floor wasn't covered in shards. In the 1990s, researchers at Pfizer were testing a compound called sildenafil. The idea? To treat chest discomfort that comes from circulation problems. But, well, the trials didn't go as planned. The drug didn't really help the heart much. Instead, something unexpected kept happening. During testing, participants started reporting another effect, and it had absolutely nothing to do with blood pressure. The surprise reaction was so consistent that the company decided to pivot. Rather than helping the heart, this new medication helped a totally different kind of performance issue. Doctors started prescribing it in controlled doses, and the results were immediate. Pretty soon, this small blue pill went from sitting on a lab shelf to becoming a cultural icon almost overnight. It was never meant to do what it became famous for. Yet today, it's used by millions, became one of the fastest-selling prescription drugs in history, and honestly, it changed how an entire issue was talked about all over the world. All because a trial didn't go the way scientists had expected. In the late 1800s, brothers John and Will Kellogg were running a sanitarium out in Michigan, where they promoted this super strict health regimen. They were always experimenting with bland, plant-based meals they thought would be good for both body and mind. One day, they left some cooked wheat dough sitting out for way too long. When they came back, it was stale, but instead of tossing it, they decided to run it through rollers anyway. The result wasn't a sheet of dough, it flaked apart. When they baked those flakes, they turned out crispy, light, and honestly, pretty tasty. The guests at the sanitarium loved them. The brothers started refining the process and eventually switched from wheat to corn, creating what we now know as corn flakes. At first, it was sold as a health food, but soon it exploded in popularity with regular households. Just add a splash of milk, maybe a pinch of sugar, and breakfast was never the same again. That forgotten lump of dough, it turned into a $20 billion global cereal industry. At the turn of the 20th century, manufacturers needed a cheaper alternative to shellac, which was this natural resin used in everything from electrical insulation to jewelry. Shellac was expensive and honestly pretty tough to source. So enter Leo Baekeland, a Belgian chemist working over in New York. In 1907, while tinkering with synthetic compounds, he combined phenol and formaldehyde under pressure and heat. The result? A hard, moldable, and heat-resistant material he decided to call Bakelite. It was the first fully synthetic plastic, and yeah, it didn't just replace shellac. It actually reshaped entire industries. Phones, radios, kitchenware, buttons, even car parts were soon being molded from Bakelite. Unlike natural materials, plastic could be shaped into anything at any scale and produced cheaply. Today, plastic is everywhere, from medical devices to space equipment. It all started as a mistake, a lab experiment gone a bit sideways. Now, it's one of the most influential materials ever created. Swiss engineer George de Mestral wasn't really trying to invent anything when he got back from a hike in the Alps and noticed his dog just covered in burrs. Curious, he took a closer look under a microscope and saw hundreds of tiny hooks. These hooks had latched onto the loops in his dog's fur and, yeah, in his own wool socks. That sparked an idea. What if you could recreate that mechanism? He spent years designing a fabric with tiny synthetic hooks on one side and soft loops on the other. In the late 1950s, his invention was finally complete. He called it Velcro, a mashup of the French words for velvet and hook. It wasn't an instant hit, honestly. but eventually it found its place, especially in aerospace. NASA astronauts used it in zero gravity to secure objects in their cabins. Soon it made its way into clothing, shoes, bags, and even medical gear. One annoying burr led to one of the simplest, yet most useful fasteners ever made. Just goes to show, nature always has a few tricks worth copying. In the 1870s, a chemist named Konstantin Fölberg was hard at work in a lab at Johns Hopkins University dealing with coal tar derivatives, chemical compounds that, let's be real, were anything but appetizing. He spent hours combining and testing different mixtures, trying to come up with new preservatives. After a long day, he left the lab, went home, and sat down for dinner. That's when something strange happened. His bread tasted unusually sweet. So did his fingers, even the utensils he was holding. At first he thought he was just imagining it, until he realized he'd skipped one important step before dinner washing his hands. Curious, Fölberg rushed back to the lab, retraced his steps, and eventually identified the compound responsible benzoic sulfamide. It wasn't sugar, but it totally fooled the tongue. He refined the substance, patented it, and called it saccharin. Years later, during wartime sugar shortages and the rise of diet products, it really surged in popularity. Saccharin is now used all over the world in low-calorie sweeteners and food products. And it all happened because a chemist got a little too hungry to rinse his hands. During World War II, Harry Coover, a chemist at Eastman Kodak, was under a ton of pressure to create a clear, durable plastic for gun sights. He tested like dozens of materials, including this really tricky compound called cyanoacrylate. Honestly, it was a nightmare. It stuck to everything: tools, fingers, lab counters, you name it. And it made the testing process almost impossible. So he just shelved it as a failed experiment. But you know, years later, while leading another research team working on aircraft canopies, Coover ran into cyanoacrylate again. This time, though, he looked at it differently. Instead of fighting its extreme stickiness, they decided to embrace it. The material bonded instantly, needed no heat or pressure, and was like incredibly strong. What had once been a total lab disaster was actually a revolutionary adhesive. In the 1950s, Superglue hit the market. It became an overnight success, used to fix household items, secure small parts, and even close wounds in emergency field situations. Today, it's a staple in homes, workshops, and hospitals. All thanks to a glue that failed its first mission, but wow, succeeded way beyond anything the inventors had planned. In 1826, British chemist John Walker was just mixing chemicals in his lab when he noticed this sticky substance forming on the end of a wooden stirring stick. It had a mix of sulfur, potassium chlorate, and some other materials. Nothing too wild. But as he scraped the dried glob off the stick, it suddenly sparked and ignited. Flames shot up from the end, totally catching Walker by surprise. It wasn't super dramatic, but it was definitely effective. He had actually created fire by accident. Walker immediately saw the potential. A fire-starting tool that didn't need flint, friction blocks, or any separate ignition source? That was a total game changer. He started making these friction lights from small wooden sticks dipped in his chemical mix, then sold them in his shop. Sure, they weren't perfect. They were smelly and a bit unstable, but they were way easier than the old fire-starting methods. Within a few decades, safety matches and paper matchbooks evolved from his discovery. Millions were soon being made all over the world. That simple spark, just from cleaning a stirring stick, really did light the way to modern convenience. In 1943, naval engineer Richard James was working on stabilizers for sensitive ship equipment, specifically springs that could absorb shock in rough seas. One afternoon, while at his desk in Philadelphia, he accidentally knocked one of the coiled metal prototypes off the edge. Instead of just dropping to the ground, the spring actually seemed to walk. It stretched, flipped, and landed on the floor in a neat pile. His wife Betty saw it too, and she was just as stunned. It didn't fall, it performed. James couldn't stop thinking about it. He brought more springs home, kept refining the design, and started testing different types of steel. Eventually, he found the perfect formula: a 2.5-ounce, 80-foot coil of wire that could stretch, flip, and walk down steps. Betty named it Slinky, light, catchy, and honestly, just fun to say. It launched at Gimbel's department store right before Christmas and sold out instantly. Kids were mesmerized. From a military lab to toy store shelves, Slinky became one of the most iconic toys in American history. It's been to space, showed up in movies, and, well, it's never stopped walking since that day in the engineer's office. It wasn't a scientist or a chef. It was actually an 11-year-old boy named Frank Epperson who invented one of the world's favorite frozen treats. Back in 1905, Frank was mixing powdered soda with water in a cup using a small wooden stir stick. Like any kid, he got distracted. He left the cup out on the porch overnight, and the temperature dropped unexpectedly. The next morning, Frank found the mixture frozen solid, with the stick still inside. He pulled the frozen lump from the cup and licked it. It was cold, sweet, and completely different from anything else at the time. He didn't know it then, but he had created the first popsicle. Years later, as an adult, Frank remembered his accidental discovery and filed a patent for his frozen drink on a stick. The treat quickly gained popularity at fairs and boardwalks, especially during hot summers. Eventually, the rights were sold to a company that mass-produced them, and the popsicle became a staple of childhood. Dozens of flavors, countless brands, and billions of sales, all trace back to one chilly night and a boy who forgot his cup on the porch. Long before bubblegum came in bright wrappers, chewing gum had natural roots, literally. For centuries, indigenous peoples of the Americas chewed tree sap, especially chicle, tapped from the sapodilla tree. Fast forward to the 1860s, and former Mexican leader Antonio López de Santa Anna arrived in New York with a strange plan. He wanted to turn chicle into a rubber substitute for tires. He handed a batch to inventor Thomas Adams. Adams tried, but it failed miserably for industrial use. Instead of discarding it, Adams popped a piece in his mouth and discovered it was oddly pleasant to chew. The sap didn't dissolve, didn't stick to teeth, and had a satisfying bounce. Adams sweetened it, flavored it, and began selling it as a candy novelty. Within a few years, chewing gum was everywhere, sold in vending machines, pharmacies, and corner stores. From a failed rubber experiment to a national craze, chewing gum became a billion-dollar industry. That simple, sticky pleasure now comes in thousands of flavors and forms, all starting with a tree, a tire dream, and a curious bite. In the early 1900s, British metallurgist Harry Brearley was working in Sheffield, trying to develop a better material for rifle barrels. The military needed steel that wouldn't corrode after repeated use in harsh conditions. Brearley tested dozens of alloys, combining iron with small amounts of chromium and other metals. One sample seemed like a dud. It was hard and didn't machine well. He tossed it aside. Weeks later, he noticed something strange. The scrap he had thrown out hadn't rusted. In a city known for damp air and metal oxidation, that was honestly pretty remarkable. Curious, he polished it and tested it further. It resisted stains, corrosion, and moisture like nothing else. He had created stainless steel. At first, no one knew what to do with it. Then cutlery makers started using it. Soon after, it spread to surgical tools, architecture, and eventually kitchenware around the world. Today, it's used in everything from skyscrapers to spacecraft, and it all began with a failed attempt to make better bullets. That's about it. So which discovery surprised you the most? Write in the comments, and don't forget to check out our other videos.